Ethan Reed, a quiet elderly man with an unassuming presence, stepped into the bustling showroom of Highland Motors on a frosty afternoon. His aging sedan, reliable but weary from years of use, had finally prompted him to search for an upgrade. Wrapped in a well-worn coat and scuffed shoes, Ethan stood out in stark contrast to the gleaming interiors and affluent clientele around him. Yet, he was unbothered. He wasn't here to impress, only to find a car that suited his needs. Ethan wandered through the dealership, admiring the polished vehicles under the bright lights. The metallic sheen of a sleek black sedan caught his attention, but what struck him even more was the cold indifference of the staff. No one approached him. Instead, they flocked to younger, flashier patrons who exuded wealth and status. Ethan's modest attire seemed to render him invisible. A young salesman, Connor Hayes, with perfectly styled hair and a self-assured demeanor, glanced briefly at Ethan before turning his charm toward a well-dressed couple. Ethan, however, remained patient, standing beside the sedan, his hand brushing lightly against its glossy surface. His mind wandered to long drives through the countryside, the thrill of starting anew. But 20 minutes passed and his patience waned. He finally approached the front desk, where 3 salesmen stood engrossed in laughter. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the irritation building in his chest. "I'm interested in buying a car. Could someone assist me?" Connor barely looked up from his phone. "We're a bit busy right now," he replied dismissively. "Come back later." Ethan's face remained calm, but his heart burned with frustration. He nodded curtly and turned to leave, his steps heavy with disappointment. As the glass doors closed behind him, a faint sneer from a salesman reached his ears, wasting time on window shoppers. Little did they know that Ethan Reed was no ordinary man. He had spent decades quietly building a fortune through shrewd investments and an unwavering work ethic. As he drove away in his old sedan, humiliation simmered into resolve. A plan began to take shape, one that would not only alter the course of his life, but also shake Highland Motors to its core. That evening, Ethan Reed sat in his modest living room, a cup of tea warming his hands as he stared out into the crisp winter night. The humiliation he had endured replayed in his mind, not as a wound but as a spark of inspiration. He reached for his phone, dialing numbers he hadn't called in years. Each conversation was deliberate, each connection a piece of a larger puzzle forming in his mind. Ethan's network was vast and influential, though he rarely flaunted it. Over decades, he had cultivated relationships with some of the sharpest minds in business and finance. When Ethan spoke, people listened, not because of his wealth, but because of the respect he commanded through his integrity and wisdom. By dawn, the pieces had fallen into place. Ethan had orchestrated a deal that would not only purchase Highland Motors, but do so with the precision of a seasoned tactician. It wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. People deserved respect, no matter how they dressed or what assumptions were made about their bank accounts. The next morning, Ethan returned to Highland Motors. He wore the same worn coat, the same scuffed shoes, and carried the same unassuming demeanor. But this time, he wasn't there as a customer. As he stepped through the glass doors, the showroom bustled with the same energy, the same dismissive staff bustling about. Connor Hayes glanced up briefly, his smirk unchanged, before returning to a polished couple admiring a luxury SUV. Ethan's gaze scanned the room until he spotted the general manager, Peter Lawson, a man in his 50s with a graying beard and a tired but polite expression. Ethan approached, holding a neatly folded envelope in his hand. "Good morning," Ethan said, his tone steady. Peter smiled thinly, clearly uncertain about this visitor. "Good morning, sir. How can I assist you?" Ethan extended the envelope. "By reading this." Peter hesitated, then unfolded the papers. As his eyes scanned the text, his smile faltered, then vanished entirely. This can't be right," Peter stammered, his voice trembling. You You bought the dealership? Ethan's voice was calm but resolute. That's correct. As of this morning, Highland Motors is under new ownership. The room fell silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as staff turned their attention to the unfolding scene. Ethan stood firm, the weight of his quiet authority settling over the room. I'm here to make some changes, Ethan announced, his voice carrying across the showroom. His gaze swept over the staff, his next words laced with both purpose and promise. And I expect things to be very different from today forward. The tension in the air was palpable as the reality of Ethan's words sank in. Conversations turned to whispers, and eyes darted nervously between him and Peter Lawson, the now former general manager, who stood frozen, still clutching the documents. Ethan remained calm, letting the weight of the moment settle before he spoke again. Yesterday, I walked into this dealership as a customer, Ethan began, his voice steady yet laced with quiet intensity. I came here looking to buy a car, something I've been planning for years. But instead of being welcomed, I was dismissed, ignored, and judged, based on nothing more than my appearance. He turned his gaze to Connor Hayes, who shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. And you, Mr. Hayes, ensured that experience was as demeaning as possible. Connor's smirk had vanished, replaced by a pale, nervous expression. He opened his mouth to respond, but Ethan raised a hand to silence him. I'm not interested in excuses, Ethan said sharply. What I am interested in is ensuring that no one who walks through these doors ever feels the way I did. Ethan's gaze swept across the room. Let me make one thing clear. This dealership will no longer tolerate arrogance, prejudice, or indifference. Starting today, every customer, regardless of their appearance, will be treated with the respect they deserve. If that's something you cannot abide by, you have no place here. Peter Lawson finally found his voice. Mr. Reed, with all due respect, you can't just walk in here and— I can, Ethan interrupted, his tone firm but measured. And I have. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your position as general manager. Peter's face turned crimson. You can't be serious. I am entirely serious, Ethan replied. Your leadership has allowed this toxic culture to fester, and that ends today. As Peter stumbled for words, Ethan turned to Connor. Mr. Hayes, your behavior yesterday exemplified everything that's wrong with this dealership. Pack your belongings. You're dismissed. Connor's eyes widened in shock. But now, Ethan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Connor lowered his head, his confidence shattered. As he shuffled toward the back office, the remaining staff exchanged uneasy glances, each wondering if they would be next. Ethan's attention shifted to the group at large. This is not about revenge, he said, his voice softening slightly. This is about values, about creating a place where every person is treated with dignity. If you're willing to embrace that, you're welcome to stay. If not, I suggest you leave now. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint sound of Connor's footsteps disappearing into the office. One by one, the staff began to process the gravity of Ethan's words. Among them was a young woman, Claire Harper, whose kind demeanor had stood out amidst the hostility. Though she had not been in sales, she had been the only employee to offer Ethan a polite smile the previous day. Ethan turned to her. Miss Harper, step forward. Claire hesitated, then approached, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Yes, sir? You treated me with respect, even when no one else did, Ethan said. As of today, you're the new floor manager. I trust you'll set the standard for how customers should be treated. Claire's eyes widened in disbelief. Me? But I'm not. Qualified? Ethan interrupted gently. Kindness and decency are all the qualifications you need for this role. I believe in your potential. Do you? Claire swallowed hard, then nodded. Yes, thank you, Mr. Reed. Ethan smiled warmly. Then let's get to work. By the end of the day, several staff members had been let go, while others received warnings to change their behavior. Ethan wasted no time bringing in replacements. people whose values aligned with his vision. As the sun set over Highland Motors, the dealership was already beginning its transformation. Ethan left that evening knowing this was only the beginning. The true challenge lay ahead, rebuilding the trust and reputation the dealership had lost. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a deep sense of purpose. Ethan returned to Highland Motors the following morning, greeted by a palpable air of unease. The dealership, once filled with dismissive laughter and indifferent faces, now felt like a blank canvas, a place waiting for new colors to be painted upon it. The staff who remained were quiet, each grappling with the weight of the previous day's events. Among them was Claire Harper, now floor manager, standing near the reception desk. She looked over at Ethan as he entered, her face a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Good morning, Miss Harper," Ethan said with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she replied, straightening her posture. "I've already started reviewing the staff assignments and customer feedback forms from the last quarter. There's a lot to improve." Ethan nodded approvingly. "You're off to a good start. Remember, you're not alone in this. Lean on the team and make sure they understand why we're making these changes." Claire smiled faintly. "I'll do my best." As Ethan walked through the showroom, he noticed subtle but promising signs of change. Staff members, though subdued, were beginning to interact with customers differently, offering genuine assistance rather than rehearsed sales pitches. Ethan approached one of the newer hires, a young man named Daniel, who was assisting a middle-aged couple with a family car. "Good work, Daniel," Ethan said softly after the couple left with brochures and smiles. "That's exactly the kind of service we need." "Thank you, Mr. Reed," Daniel replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "I want to make sure everyone feels welcome here." Ethan nodded, his resolve strengthening. The transformation was slow but noticeable, and it gave him hope. Later that afternoon, a familiar figure walked through the glass doors, Connor Hayes. His suit was immaculate, and his expression carried a mix of defiance and desperation. He approached Ethan directly, the tension between them palpable. "Mr. Reed," Connor began, his voice carefully measured, "I'd like to speak with you." Ethan crossed his arms, waiting. "I want my job back," Connor said. I realize I made mistakes. I was arrogant, dismissive, but I've been with this dealership for years. I know the business inside out." Ethan regarded him in silence for a long moment. "And what have you learned from your mistakes, Mr. Hayes?" Connor hesitated, then sighed. "That people aren't always what they seem, and that respect costs nothing, but it can mean everything." Ethan's gaze softened slightly. "Words are easy, Mr. Hayes. Prove it." "How?" Connor asked, his voice tinged with genuine curiosity. Ethan smiled faintly. "Come back tomorrow. Not as a salesman, but as a trainee under Miss Harper's guidance. Show me you're willing to rebuild yourself from the ground up." Connor blinked in surprise. "A trainee?" "That's the offer," Ethan said firmly. "Take it or leave it." Connor's jaw tightened, but after a moment he nodded. "I'll take it." As Connor left, Ethan turned to Claire, who had overheard the exchange. "Do you think he can change?" she asked. Ethan's expression was thoughtful. "People rarely change unless they truly want to, but everyone deserves a chance to try." That night, as Ethan reflected on the day, he felt the first stirrings of a new culture at Highland Motors. A culture built on respect, second chances, and the belief that everyone, no matter their mistakes, could choose to do better. The next morning, Highland Motors opened its doors to a quiet, cold dawn. Ethan Reed arrived early as usual, finding Claire Harper already at her desk. Her dedication was a bright spot in the dealership's ongoing transformation, and Ethan appreciated her steady presence. Shortly after the doors opened, Connor Hayes walked in. His usual swagger was replaced with a more subdued demeanor. Gone was the slick suit. Instead, he wore a simple button-up shirt and slacks, blending in rather than standing out. He approached Claire, who was organizing paperwork at the reception desk. "Miss Harper," Connor began, his voice cautious. "I'm here to start, as a trainee." Claire regarded him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she extended a hand. "Welcome back, Mr. Hayes. Let's get to work." Connor hesitated, clearly surprised by the gesture, before shaking her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. Ethan watched the exchange from a distance, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Connor's willingness to return, humbled and ready to learn, was a small victory. But it was only the beginning. As the day unfolded, Ethan made his way through the dealership, observing the interactions between staff and customers. He noticed a younger woman struggling to make a decision about her first car, her anxiety evident in the way she fidgeted with the straps of her bag. Connor approached her, his tone gentle. "Hi there. Looking for something specific, or just exploring options today?" The woman hesitated. "I need a car for work, but I'm not sure what I can afford. This place looks so expensive." Connor smiled, the arrogance that once marked his demeanor now replaced with sincerity. "Let's take a look at some options. We have a range of vehicles that might work for you. It's all about finding the right fit." Ethan lingered nearby, watching as Connor guided her through the process with patience and care. By the end of their conversation, she left with a brochure and a smile, promising to return with her father to finalize the decision. Ethan approached Connor afterward. "Well done," he said. Connor met his gaze, a mix of relief and gratitude in his expression. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. I want to make things right." "Then keep doing what you just did," Ethan replied, clapping him lightly on the shoulder. Meanwhile, Claire was flourishing in her new role as floor manager. She had begun holding short daily meetings with the staff, encouraging open communication and setting clear expectations for respectful customer interactions. The team was starting to respond to her leadership, their initial resistance softening as they recognized her genuine commitment to change. One particular afternoon, a longtime customer, Mr. Bennett, walked in. Known for his sharp eye and sharp tongue, he was a test for any salesperson. Claire stepped forward to greet him personally. "Good afternoon, Mr. Bennett," she said with a warm smile. "It's good to see you again. What brings you in today?" The older man raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the friendly reception. "I'm thinking about upgrading," he said gruffly, "but let's see if the service here is any better than the last time." Claire didn't flinch. "I'm confident we can meet your expectations. Let me personally assist you." Ethan observed the interaction with pride. Claire's poise and professionalism were infectious, slowly spreading to the rest of the staff. By the end of the day, the dealership hummed with a new energy. Customers who walked through the doors left feeling seen, heard, and respected. Ethan stayed late, reviewing customer feedback and sales reports in his modest office. The numbers were improving, but more importantly, the comments from customers reflected a growing sense of trust in Highland Motors. As Ethan locked up for the night, he paused to take in the quiet showroom, its polished floors reflecting the soft glow of the overhead lights. The space, once tainted by arrogance and indifference, was beginning to feel alive with possibility. Ethan smiled to himself. The seeds of change had been planted, and they were starting to take root. But there was still work to be done, and he was ready for the challenge. For the first time in years, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a mission to build something greater than just a successful business. He was building a legacy of respect, kindness, and second chances. Winter began to thaw, and with it came a slow but steady transformation at Highland Motors. Word of the dealership's changes spread throughout the community, sparking curiosity. Regular customers returned to experience the new approach, and new faces arrived, drawn by whispers of a place where every individual was treated with dignity. Ethan Reed, ever observant, spent his days quietly ensuring the foundations of his vision were solid. He maintained a hands-off approach, trusting Claire Harper to lead her team while offering guidance when needed. Her confidence had blossomed under his mentorship, and the staff had begun to look to her for leadership. One busy afternoon, the dealership was bustling with activity. A young couple entered, looking hesitant. They lingered near the entrance, scanning the room nervously. Claire noticed them immediately and approached with a welcoming smile. "Hello," she said warmly. "How can we help you today?" The man, dressed in a worn jacket, exchanged a glance with his partner before speaking. We're looking for a family car. Something safe, but we're on a tight budget." Claire's expression softened. "Of course, let's see what we can find that works for you." As she led them toward the more affordable options, Connor Hayes passed by, carrying a set of keys for another customer. He paused, then turned back. "Claire," he said, stepping in, "mind if I help with this one?" Claire raised an eyebrow, then nodded. "Be my guest." Connor turned to the couple with a genuine smile. "I think I have a few models in mind that might be perfect for you." Ethan watched the interaction from his office, a faint sense of pride stirring within him. Connor was proving that people could change if given the chance. Moments like these reaffirmed Ethan's belief in the power of second chances. Later that day, Ethan received an unexpected visitor, Robert Kingsley, owner of a competing luxury dealership across town. Robert was known for his competitive streak and polished demeanor, and his presence was a rare one. "Ethan," Robert said with a polite smile, extending a hand. "Word travels fast. I had to see for myself what all the fuss is about." Ethan shook his hand. "Robert, what brings you here?" Robert chuckled, though his tone carried an edge. "You've turned Highland Motors into quite the community darling. Customers are singing your praises. I admit I didn't see this coming." Ethan remained calm. "I'm not in this for competition, Robert. I'm here to build something meaningful." Robert's smile faltered. "Well, I hope you know what you're doing. These changes, they might work now. But don't forget, this is a business. Kindness doesn't always pay the bills." Ethan met Robert's gaze steadily. "Kindness isn't just an ideal, Robert. It's good business. People remember how you treat them, and they return because they trust you." Robert nodded, though his expression suggested skepticism. "We'll see how long that lasts." As Robert left, Ethan leaned back in his chair, more determined than ever. He wasn't chasing profit at the expense of people. He was building something far more enduring. By evening, the dealership was quiet, and Ethan walked the floor, reflecting on the day's events. Claire approached him, a mix of pride and fatigue on her face. "Another good day," she said. Ethan smiled. "Thanks to you and the team. The changes are sticking." Claire hesitated, then spoke. "Mr. Reed, I just want to say thank you for believing in me, in all of us. It's not just the dealership you've changed us." Ethan's smile deepened. "Change doesn't come from one person, Claire. It's a collective effort. You've all risen to the challenge." As they stood in the quiet showroom, the faint hum of the city outside, Ethan felt a sense of peace. Highland Motors was no longer just a dealership. It was becoming a place where values flourished, where respect and kindness were the cornerstones of its success. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Ethan was ready. For the first time, the dealership wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of what was possible when people worked together for something greater than themselves. Spring arrived, casting a warm glow over Highland Motors. The dealership, once steeped in arrogance and indifference, now thrived with life and purpose. Sales had soared, but the real victory lay in the smiles of customers and the pride shining on the faces of the staff. Ethan Reed stood by the large windows of his modest office, gazing out at the showroom bustling with activity. His heart swelled with quiet satisfaction. The journey had been anything but easy, but the rewards were undeniable. Highland Motors wasn't just succeeding, it was flourishing. A familiar face entered the showroom, the young woman Connor Hayes had helped days earlier. This time, she wasn't alone. She walked in with her father, their expressions hopeful as they approached Connor. "We're ready to buy," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "You were right. The car is perfect for us." Connor smiled, a genuine warmth lighting his face. "That's great to hear. Let's finalize the paperwork." Ethan observed from a distance as Connor led them to his desk, his tone patient and professional. The young salesman's transformation was remarkable. Where arrogance had once clouded his interactions, humility now guided him. Ethan couldn't help but feel proud. Later that afternoon, Claire Harper gathered the team for a meeting. The staff stood in a loose circle, their camaraderie palpable. Claire addressed them with confidence, her words carrying the authority of a leader who had earned her place. "I want to thank each of you," she began, her voice steady. "We've come a long way together. What we've built here isn't just a business, it's a community, and that's something to be proud of." Applause rippled through the group, and Ethan watched from the sidelines, his heart full. Claire's growth had been one of the most rewarding aspects of this journey. Her leadership was the foundation of the dealership's transformation, and he knew it would carry Highland Motors into a bright future. As the day wound down, Ethan walked the floor one last time, soaking in the energy of the place. Customers laughed and chatted with staff, and the showroom buzzed with an atmosphere of welcome and trust. Claire approached him, a small envelope in her hand. "Mr. Reed," she said, smiling, "we wanted to give you this." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" She handed it to him, her eyes twinkling. "Just open it." Ethan unfolded the paper inside. It was a simple card, signed by every member of the team. Inside, a single line stood out: "Thank you for believing in us, and for teaching us to believe in ourselves." Ethan's eyes softened and he nodded, tucking the card into his coat pocket. "Thank you, Claire. This means more to me than you know." That evening, as Ethan locked up for the night, he took one last walk through the empty showroom. His footsteps echoed softly against the polished floors. The once cold and indifferent space now radiated warmth and purpose. He had come here months ago as a dismissed customer, underestimated and unseen. Now he was leaving as a catalyst for change. Ethan stepped outside, breathing in the crisp night air. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, and a sense of peace washed over him. Highland Motors was no longer a reflection of his frustration. It was a testament to his belief in the power of respect, humility, and second chances. He smiled to himself, unlocking his old sedan. For all the changes he had made, his simplicity remained. True wealth, he had always known, wasn't in material things but in the impact one left on others. As the engine hummed to life and he drove away, Ethan felt an unshakable sense of fulfillment. Highland Motors had become more than just a dealership. It was a legacy, a living reminder that kindness and integrity could shape not only a business, but also the lives of everyone it touched. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thank you all for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next video.